morning, everyone, and welcome to Fox 29 News Now in Philadelphia. We are going to take you live to Detroit, Michigan, where Visitation is being held for Aretha Franklin. Again, you're looking live at Visitation Services for Aretha Franklin. Today marks the beginning of 2 days of public viewing of the Queen of Soul before she's laid to rest later this week. Public viewings will take place today and tomorrow at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. An additional viewing has been scheduled for Thursday, August 30th at the New Bethel Baptist Church from noon to 4 p.m. Today around 7:30, Franklin's gold casket arrived at LaSalle hearse as a line of people waiting to pay their respects had already extended down the block. We're now going to take you to the Pentagon, where Secretary of Defense James Mattis is briefing the press.
Lethality Task Force to accelerate the fielding of advanced equipment and to train our warfighters at the speed of relevance for the battlefield they confront. We have released our nuclear posture review outlining the necessary steps we are taking to strengthen America's nuclear deterrence so these weapons are never used, nuclear war being a war that cannot be won and must never be fought. And at the same time, we are working with the Department of State to determine how to advance arms control where possible. We have implemented new standards to improve deployability of our forces so they are ready to fight and win at any time across any domain. Current and future readiness will be enhanced by this focus we have on enhancing advanced lethality. My travel schedule indicates just how seriously I take our second line of effort, strengthening alliances and partnerships. I have visited 57 countries so far as Secretary of Defense. Our goal is to improve consultation, cooperation, and burden sharing so we can best deter the threats and the competition I mentioned earlier, because we are stronger alongside like-minded nations. I recently returned from South America, where I met with leaders in Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and Colombia. And I'm reminded that despite the problems we admittedly face here in our hemisphere, we are fortunate to see increasingly an island of democratic stability and growing prosperity in an unstable world, from Ottawa to Santiago and Buenos Aires. There are exceptions, and we know them: Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua. Even Castro knows now that the Cuban model doesn't work even for Cuba anymore, or for anyone else, as Venezuela's Maduro is finding out. But democracy is working, and we will be continuing to work with our friends from Ottawa to the southern tip of South America, for cooperation is critical for realizing the shared vision of democracy, prosperity, and security. We are working with Colombia, Ecuador, and others to schedule our hospital ship, the U.S. naval ship Comfort, to help our friends dealing with millions of poor Venezuelans fleeing their country, as we witness the human cost of Maduro's increasingly isolated regime. And we will stand with those people and our friends. Our neighbors clearly want closer relations with us, and we will work with them to realize our shared vision for the region. We are also bolstering relationships across the Atlantic. As we look to the lessons of the past, as we look back at the National Security Council's policy paper from 1953, where it said, "Freedom and security of the free nations is a direct and essential contribution to the maintenance of our own freedom and security," went on to say that building up the strength, cohesion, and common determination of the free world benefits all. Last month at NATO's summit, we reinforced that message, and it yielded tangible results. Discussions were candid, and they went to the heart of burden-sharing issues. Several of my counterparts told me it was the most productive meeting they'd attended. All 29 members now are spending more on defense in NATO. No longer is the question one of reducing defense budgets, as it was since the fall of the Berlin Wall until into the 2000s. No longer is the question of whether to spend more. The only questions now are how much to increase and by when. All recommitted to spending 2% of GDP on defense by 2024. We also gained unity, ladies and gentlemen, on the needed command structure that we had to reform. There are two new headquarters, one of them hosted by Germany and one that will be hosted in Norfolk. And we also gained full commitment to what we call the 430s. 30 air squadrons, 30 naval ships, 30 combat battalions, all available to fight within 30 days. That is a well-established and quantifiable goal now. We also received commitments of a plus-up of over 1,000 non-U.S. coalition allied forces to the NATO-led Afghanistan mission. Looking to the Indo-Pacific, we are bolstering existing alliances while forging new partnerships among like-minded nations. 25 nations participated in this year's RIMPAC exercise hosted by the U.S. Pacific Fleet, the largest naval exercise in the world. It was emblematic of the refreshed military relationships in that the Chilean Navy commanded the maritime element, and this is the first time a Latin American country in the history of this exercise has done so. We also continue to work closely with allies as our diplomats lead the effort to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. We keep a clear-eyed view of the challenges, working together in support of the unanimous UN Security Council resolutions to economically sanction the DPRK. The sanction enforcement patrols today are international patrols. We continue to build stronger friendships across the region, and all of our actions reinforce the vision of a free, open, inclusive, and prosperous Indo-Pacific where nations large and small are free from coercion. In South Asia, we continue to work by, with, and through allies and partners in pursuit of peace, and 2 additional countries have now joined the NATO-led campaign in Afghanistan as partner nations. That's the United Arab Emirates and Qatar, and 32 of the 39 nations which have already committed forces to the mission agreed to either increase or sustain the current force levels through 2019. We are fully supporting Afghan-led and Afghan-owned reconciliation efforts, and hard fighting is going on to convince the Taliban they must negotiate. A recent statement by a Taliban leader made specific mention of negotiations as a way to bring, and I quote here, an end to the war, unquote. This is one of the most forward-leaning statements made yet by a Taliban supreme leader, even as they conduct attacks designed to garner press attention, costing lives, and they are now stripped, however, of any religious guise for an inhumane campaign against the Afghan people. Clerical groups in Saudi Arabia, Kabul, Jakarta have all encouraged the ceasefire efforts, and as they are showing a way to end the war through this Afghan-led reconciliation process. In the Mideast, the Defeat ISIS coalition continues to make strides. Liberated ISIS-held territory in Iraq and diminished the physical caliphate in Syria. I believe that ISIS is down now to less than 2% of the land they once controlled, even as we recognize the fight is not over. As we strengthen our partnerships abroad, the Department is also looking inward to reform how we do business, and that is our third line of effort. We understand we cannot have lasting security for our country without solvency. We are conducting the first audit in the Department's history, and I want that audit to find problems. It's the only way we will be able to craft effective solutions. This ensures we uphold the trust that Congress and the American people have placed in us to spend their tax dollars wisely. In other reform efforts, DoD has realized nearly $4 billion in savings in FY18, though we can apply it to more lethality. We initiated the repeal of several hundred unnecessary regulations across the Department, enhancing our efficiency and making it easier for industry to work with us and without compromising performance or accountability. We embraced and finalized the congressionally directed split between our acquisition and sustainment and our research and engineering offices to ensure our warfighters have the technology and equipment they need, both on the battlefields of today as well as tomorrow. The bottom line, DoD is making significant progress along our three strategic lines of effort. Our strategic framework is proving applicable across our far-flung department's operations, and we will continue to drive results in the months and years ahead. On a couple of other issues, on MAVNI, this is the program, ladies and gentlemen, designed to enlist immigrants with needed skills. The issues with the program are not about immigration. They are about national security. We need and want every qualified patriot willing to serve and able to serve. 2 years ago, in 2016, an independent IG investigation raised security concerns with MAVNI applicants, resulting in the suspension of new applicants that year. DoD has been working diligently to complete the screenings that were directed by the IG investigation for those already in the pipeline. For the roughly 6,000 who have served, are currently serving, or have recently cleared the security process under MAVNI thus far, the U.S. military welcomes them as critical and valued members of our armed forces. On Yemen, we support our partner Saudi Arabia's sovereign right to self-defense, and we recognize the end of the conflict requires a political solution. And both State Department and Department of Defense are working closely with the UN Special Envoy Martin Griffiths in that regard. We are also working closely with the coalition that is fighting to support the UN-recognized government in order to determine what went wrong with errant bombing attacks and prevent their recurrence. With that, let me pass the mic to the chairman, to General Dunford, for an overview of what our men and women are doing around the world and how DoD is turning budget dollars into joint readiness and capability. General Dunford.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to begin by reinforcing the Secretary's comments on Senator McCain. Our thoughts and prayers are with his family. As a naval officer and as a member of Congress, he was a lifelong and tireless advocate for the men and women of the U.S. military. While we mourn Senator McCain's passing, we'll be eternally grateful for his distinguished service and his courageous example. Before we take your questions, I'll highlight some of the ongoing operations and exercises across our geographic combatant commands. Our priority in the Indo-Pacific Command is supporting the State Department-led diplomatic and economic efforts aimed at denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. 28,000 U.S. military personnel are stationed on the peninsula, demonstrating our commitment to the alliance and deterring North Korean aggression. We're also conducting air and maritime operations to disrupt ship-to-ship transfers of fuel in violation of UN sanctions against the DPRK, and we're doing this in conjunction with allies and partners. Across the Indo-Pacific Command, U.S. military forces work on a day-to-day basis with allies and partners to preserve a rules-based international order that's consistent with our interests. Indo-PACOM also has exercise programs in 31 nations to train, advise, and assist partner forces in internal security, counter-narcotics, and counter-terrorism operations. In the Central Command, we remain focused on our mission in Afghanistan, the Defeat ISIS campaign in Iraq and Syria, and countering Iran's destabilizing influence across the region. Approximately 14,000 U.S. military personnel are deployed to Afghanistan as part of Operation Freedom Sentinel and NATO's Operation Resolute Support. Our primary mission remains countering terrorist threats to the United States. Our forces, alongside forces from 40 NATO and partner nations, are also training, advising, and assisting over 300,000 Afghan forces who are responsible for security in Afghanistan. In Iraq and Syria, we're operating as part of a 77-member Defeat ISIS coalition. In Syria, 2,000 U.S. and additional coalition forces are working to enable the 50,000 Syrian Democratic Forces in clearing the remainder of ISIS in the Euphrates River Valley and in stabilizing those areas that have been cleared of ISIS. In Iraq, the priority is supporting Iraqi security forces to ensure that the success they have had against ISIS is enduring. In the European Command, we're enhancing our alliances and deterring Russian aggression through enhanced forward presence and other force posture initiatives. We also have a robust exercise and training program enabled by the European Defense Initiative. This year, we've conducted 13 joint exercises in Europe, in addition to a wide range of service-specific training and engagement. In Africa Command, approximately 7,200 U.S. forces are supporting thousands more African military partners in providing for their own security and conducting counter-terrorist operations against ISIS and al-Qaeda affiliates. Our efforts include developing security forces in Somalia, countering ISIS in Libya, and supporting partners in the Sahel and Lake Chad regions. In the U.S. Southern Command, we're also working to deepen our security relationships in addressing regional challenges and threats. As the Secretary mentioned, the U.S. Navy hospital ship Comfort will soon deploy to relieve the pressure of increased population flows from Venezuela. And finally, here at home, the U.S. Northern Command has 1,600 DoD personnel and 33 aircraft working to suppress wildfires in the western states, while more than 2,000 guardsmen are supporting Homeland Security on the southern border. The Northern Command also provides around-the-clock ballistic missile defense, while Americans and Canadians from the North American Air Defense Command defend our airspace. Even while meeting today's requirements, the combatant commanders and the services are adapting and innovating. Our efforts include a series of globally integrated exercises and experiments to help shape the force we'll need to fight and win tomorrow. In closing, I believe you can see that your men and women in uniform are busy, and we're very proud of them. But we don't do any of this alone. As the Secretary said, we're grateful for Congress's support expressed in the bipartisan National Defense Authorization Act. And in all that we do, we work alongside our allies and partners, our source of strength. Thank you.
Mr. Secretary.
Go ahead, Bob.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, you mentioned Yemen. Today there was a report for the UN that said that the coalition and the Yemen government may be responsible for war crimes. My question is, how do you justify continued American investment of support and American credibility in a coalition that has produced such problematic results, which in fact have been characterized by some as a humanitarian disaster?
Well, the reality is that that battlefield is a humanitarian field, and we recognize the tragedy there. That's why I emphasized that we're working with the UN Special Envoy to try and end this, to drive this to a UN-brokered negotiation. But we did review the support for the Arab coalition when we came into office. As you know, it was started before we arrived here. We reviewed it. We determined that it was the right thing to do to support them in the defense of their own countries, but also to restore the rightful government. There is, in effect, what is going on. Our conduct there is to try to keep the human cost of innocents being killed accidentally to the absolute minimum. That is our goal, where we engage with the coalition. In Yemen, as a general statement, we stay out of the war ourselves, and we are focused on defeating ISIS and al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. That's what we do where we conduct operations. So, again, our goal is to reduce this tragedy and to get it to the UN brokered table as quickly as possible.
Considering, given what's happened recently, are you reconsidering or considering reviewing again the American support for that?
We are constantly reviewing what support we are giving, yes. We also had an Army Lieutenant General in Riyadh almost immediately following the early August tragedy to convey our concerns and ask for a swift and complete investigation. And we will continue to do everything we can to limit this kind of tragedy, but the most effective way is to get this to a UN-brokered negotiation.
A question of General Dunford. Could you bring us up to date on the training with Turkey and the joint patrols, where that stands?
Sure, Bob. About 2 months ago, we began to work with the Turks on, more broadly, the security in northern Syria, the focus on Manbij. There's 2 phases. One is independent patrols with coordination and communication between Turkish forces, U.S. and coalition forces. Second phase being combined patrols. We are now conducting the independent patrols with communication between the Turks, and we're still planning with the Turks for combined patrols. In order to do combined patrols, one, we need a command and control construct set up. We need joint training to be done in Turkey, and we need an agreement on rules of engagement and other details of the patrolling, and that's ongoing. It's ongoing, Bob. We're both satisfied, that is, the Turks and the United States, with the pace of our planning. Most importantly, security is being provided. In Syria, we're talking about making some refinements to that security in the future.
Barbara?
Mr. Secretary and General Dunford, first, sir, I wanted to ask you about Syria and Russia. Are you concerned that the Russians may stand aside and let the Syrians move chemical weapons capability into the Idlib area for what everyone agrees is an upcoming assault on Idlib? Can you tell us anything about what the U.S. may be doing to pressure the Russians to keep the Syrians from doing that? And for General Dunford, very quickly, according to Iranian news agencies, the head of the Navy's Revolutionary Guard Corps there said yesterday that Iran has full control of the Gulf and that the U.S. Navy does not belong anymore in the Persian Gulf. I'm just wondering if you have a response for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard on that point.
Barbara, on the chemical weapons, you have seen our administration act twice on the use of chemical weapons. Your question goes really to the heart of the issue. I will assure you that Department of State has been in active communication, recent active communication with Russia to enlist them in preventing this. I'll just leave it at that for right now, but the communication is going on.
Hey, Barbara, for decades our forces have been postured in the Gulf to ensure freedom of navigation, and we'll continue to do that.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And General Dunford, this question is for both of you. You're about to install the 17th commander over U.S. forces in Afghanistan. And my question is, at what point is it right to call this what it might look like, a permanent U.S. presence in Afghanistan? And then secondly, given we've tried both hundreds of thousands and very small footprints of troops in Afghanistan to get to a negotiated peace, is there any advantage at all to privatizing a force if there's going to be boots on the ground for the foreseeable future?
When the Americans put their nation's credibility on the line, privatizing it is probably not a wise idea. But as far as a permanent U.S. president, number one, there's 39 nations there supporting the UN-recognized government. It's not a U.S. presence alone, and it shouldn't be implied that way. We are there in order to ensure that America's security, and just think back to 9/11 in this building, that America's security is not threatened out of that location. That involves the Afghan people being in control of their own future. This is why we talk about an Afghan-led, Afghan-owned reconciliation process. And we believe that the best way to get there is to ensure Taliban recognizes they can't win on the battlefield. They must negotiate. Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Oh, sorry, did you have one?
Well, can we please get General Dunford your thoughts on this as well?
Look, you said is going to be a permanent presence. What I would tell you, Tara, is that we have permanent interests in South Asia, diplomatic interests, security interests, and we're going to maintain a presence to have influence in that region, a diplomatic presence, a security presence. And the form of that presence is going to change over time. You know, as an example, just a few years ago, we had over 100,000 U.S. forces in Afghanistan, and today we have about 14,000. So there'll be a permanent diplomatic mission in Afghanistan. There'll be permanent diplomatic presence across South Asia, but I certainly don't expect that the current forces that we have in Afghanistan represents an enduring, large military commitment.
Hey, Phil.
I had a question, but I kind of deferred back to my colleague, so may I please ask my question?
All right.
Thank you.
We run a democracy here, Tom.
Thank you. On North Korea, President Trump on June 13th said, quote, "There is no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea," end quote. Does the Pentagon share that assessment?
You know, Tom, you're asking for a straightforward answer on a complex subject. The bottom line is there was progress made. The whole world saw that progress when the two leaders sat down. We also knew very clearly this was going to be a long and challenging effort to negotiate this away. As you know, that war began in 1950 and has never ended. So we're engaged in the process, and we stay with a diplomatically led process. Our job is to support the diplomats.
Have you seen any attempts by North Korea to denuclearize?
I prefer to leave, since this is all riding on Secretary Pompeo's shoulders, prefer to leave the State Department in the position to answer these questions. We stay in a supporting role. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Secretary, I just want to pin you down a little bit on the Yemen answer you gave to Bob. Is it fair for us to think that the U.S. is willing now to curtail, or at least told the Saudi-led coalition that it's willing to curtail support should things not change? And to General Dunford, I want to ask you, if possible, about something you don't really talk about, which is your communications with your Russian counterpart, General Gerasimov. Since the Russians confirmed that they had asked about refugees and reconstruction, I just wanted to ask whether you think that's an appropriate use of the military-to-military communications channel.
You know, for the last several years, we have been working with the Saudis and the Emiratis, doing what we can to reduce any chance of innocent people being injured or killed. We recognize that we are watching a war in which the Houthi-led effort involves launching weapons out of residential areas into Saudi Arabia. We recognize the complexity of it. At no time have we felt rebuffed or ignored when we bring concerns to them. The training that we have given them, we know has paid off. We have had pilots in the air who recognize the danger of a specific mission and decline to drop even when they get the authority. We have seen staff procedures that put no fire areas around areas where there's hospitals or schools. We recognize every mistake like this is tragic in every way, but we have not seen any callous disregard by the people we're working with. So we will continue to work with them, reduce this tragedy.
Phil, I've maintained the communications link.
Take a live look back now at Philadelphia, where Philadelphia schools are already doing their best to beat the heat just a day into the new year. Students at the Philadelphia Public Schools will be dismissed early on Tuesday and Wednesday, getting out at 1 p.m. As another oppressive heat wave is expected with highs here in the mid to low 90s. With humidity, those temperatures are expected to feel much worse. Over on the main line, police in Lower Merion are searching for a person of interest in the murder of a model. Here he is, captured on newly released surveillance video by the Montgomery County District Attorney. Police believe he may have been the last person to see 36-year-old Christina Kraft. He may also have used a ride-sharing service to get her home in Ardmore. We've also been following a violent night in Philadelphia where 3 people were murdered overnight. We'll begin in Hunting Park, where a man was fatally shot while waiting for a SEPTA bus at 6th and Erie Avenue. It happened early this morning around 2:40. Police say the victim was a 55-year-old man who was on his way to work, and his co-workers were on the bus and saw the whole thing happen. The suspect ran from the scene and was caught on the bus camera while police were reviewing that video to try to track him down. Another murder in Roxboro, where police tell us 2 men were shot late last night around 10:30. One man was pronounced dead at the scene, and the other was rushed to Einstein Medical Center, where he was listed in stable condition. Police are working to track down the gunman. A third murder occurred in Juniata. Police found one man who was shot twice in the chest around 11 p.m. The shooting happened behind several homes in the 3900 block of L Street. Homicide investigators are working to identify the victim. President Trump, in a rare reversal, finally commented publicly about the passing of Senator John McCain. One thing is clear, the feud between them has not subsided, and McCain appeared to leave the final message for Trump, too. Fox's Douglas Zader has more on the story from Washington.
Well, President Trump, in a, rare reversal, I guess, finally commented publicly about the passing of Senator John McCain.
There was a lot of pressure on him to do so. So let's get down to Washington right now with the latest interesting sort of walk back on this one, Doug.
Good morning. Yeah, interesting to kind of see how this is all played out. President Trump initially ignored suggestions from both his chief of staff and his press secretary to issue a formal, kind of lengthy statement about John McCain's death over the weekend, and instead just issued a tweet. And he initially refused to answer questions about this yesterday, but last night he finally weighed in. President Trump at a meeting with evangelical leaders at the White House, breaking his near silence on the passing of Senator John McCain.
Our hearts and prayers are going to the family of Senator John McCain. Going to be a lot of activity over the next number of days, and we very much appreciate everything that Senator McCain has done for our country.
That followed an up and down day for flags at the White House, after initially keeping the flags at half-staff for just 2 days for McCain and then raising them yesterday. The White House seemed to bow to pressure from veterans groups and others to keep them lowered through the week.
I don't know anybody up here that didn't respect him. You had to respect the guy. He was genuine. He was what he was.
There is no secret that Trump and McCain did not get along. And for his part, McCain had a parting shot of his own, a final statement read by his former presidential campaign manager that seemed to target Trump.
We weaken our greatness when we confuse our patriotism with tribal rivalries that have sown resentment and hatred and violence in all the corners of the globe. We weaken it when we hide behind walls rather than tear them down.
As the Senate convened for the first time since McCain's death, the late senator's colleagues remembered his impact here, and his desk was draped in a traditional black cloth with flowers. And remember, that effort is still underway to rename the Russell Senate Office Building after John McCain. There are Democrats and Republicans alike who are behind this effort. This is something that the president does not have to sign off on. The Senate can just do this on their own. They may have to go through a committee process, though, to make it happen. So it may not be quick, but there's some momentum behind it. Mike and Karen.
Well, they probably should just get rid of the name of that building anyway, Russell. I mean, named after that guy from Chicago. He's a racist. I can't imagine why anybody wouldn't want to change it to McCain, but that's just me.
Students in Bensalem Township, Pennsylvania are heading back to school today, and they're being greeted by the smiling faces of the Bensalem Township Police Department. The department says they're making an extra effort this year to make students feel safe. Our Sabrina Kiriakos stopped by her old stomping grounds this morning to learn more.
So back when I was a grade schooler, walking the halls of Belmont Hills Elementary School, I know it's hard to imagine. I was a lot younger, but not that much smaller. So I had a patrol officer, Ben Salem officer, who is my DARE officer, and we actually have him here today to talk to us. This is Officer Fred, although he's come a long way. He's now the Director of Public Safety. Hi, Officer Fred.
How you doing?
Tell us why we're out here today. It's such a fun, happy day. The kids love seeing the officers out here.
Well, we have officers at every school in Ben Salem. Yesterday, today, all week long as the kids are coming back. Last year we ended on not such a great note in this country with the school violence and school shootings, and we wanted the kids to feel safe coming back to school, knowing that Ben Salem Police will be in the schools every single school day. We have police officers stopping by the schools. We have school resource officers in the middle school and the high school. We have the DARE program. We've got all kinds of activities with the kids because it's about building those relationships and making sure that they feel safe, because they can't be successful in school if they don't feel safe. And that's number one. That's our job, is to make sure these kids feel safe. And we have a great partnership with the school district. They welcome all the ideas that come up. This actually came from from the school district, so it was a great idea to do this, and the officers are having a good time.
I can tell.
Yeah, they really, they're enjoying it. Sometimes people don't think that, but the cops are really having a good time. We have them again this morning as we speak. They're at all 6 elementary schools. They were at the high school this morning, middle school. We're hitting every kid. We're going to do the Catholic schools, charter schools, so everywhere there's kids being educated in Ben Salem, you're going to find a police officer.
It seems like you're getting a great reaction from the kids and the parents.
And the parents. I think the parents like it too. When I was in school, we didn't worry about you sending your kid to school and there being a problem. And unfortunately, in 2018, we have to worry about that. But in Ben Salem Township, we want to take a little bit less worry away from those parents, or take it away from the parents, to make sure they know that we're doing everything possible to keep their kids safe and make them feel safe.
Thank you, Officer Fred. We're going to grab a teacher really fast. Hi there, Kara.
Hi.
All right, so how are the kids reacting to the police presence today?
I think they really like it. I think it's really positive for our school community, and it's really nice to see them out and greeting the kids. And it just gives us an overall feeling of a positive community and helps us feel safe on our property.
Why is it so important to make sure kids have that sense of safety and that bond with the officers that they might see again in the community?
Well, I think it's great too, because the Ben Salem Police will come and they will patrol around the schools. So it's nice that they get to know them, they get to see them on a regular basis. They know it's somebody that they can go to, that if they have a problem, these people are here to protect us and they're here to help us and be here for our community.
Awesome.
So it's
Thank
really
you so
great.
much. What grade do you teach?
I teach the gifted program, so I have kids in K through 5. I'm here at Belmont Hills, and I'm also at Cornwall.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for talking to us. What a great first day. We're so happy to be here. So much excitement, so much fun. And of course, the parents, the teachers, and the kids loving the police that are out here today. Back to you.
Here's a live look at Allentown, Pennsylvania. The 3 remaining Madden 19 qualifying tournaments have been canceled in the wake of the Jacksonville shooting that killed 2 gamers before the suspect turned the gun on himself. EA Sports says they will review their security protocols. This morning on Good Day Philadelphia, Anthony Pizzo, who was working on a PhD at Temple University in sports management with a focus on esports, explained a little more about the industry. Here's Mike and Karen.
All right, so this was our big story. We now know that shooter at the video game tournament had been hospitalized twice in the past for mental illness.
Yeah, down in Jacksonville over the weekend, 24-year-old David Katz lived with his father in his home in Baltimore. His parents' divorce filings they reveal that this young man spent time in 2 psychiatric facilities. Police say he opened fire at this video game tournament Sunday in Florida. 22-year-old Elijah Clayton and 28-year-old Taylor Robertson were killed and 10 others injured. Police say they were targeted, actually, by this guy, Katz. But we still don't know exactly why.
I feel fine physically. Mentally, I'm very distraught and traumatized. It's something that I've been thinking about for the last 20 hours, is like what happened if I was in a different position, if he decided to shoot a couple more bullets, if he had came in earlier when I was sitting in the seat, just dropped to the floor. And that's when I look back, I vividly saw the shooter emptying rounds out of his handgun into the crowd of people. I was balled up under the bar and where I was playing my game. And at some point I got up and ran away into a bathroom with some other people while my face was bleeding profusely.
That was Chris McFarlane, who you just heard from there. He lives in Upper Darby. He's back here in Philly now after he got out of the hospital. came within an inch of dying in that. So EA Sports has decided to cancel the 3 remaining qualifying tournaments while they review the security protocol. You know, they're trying to set up next time more screening stations and metal detectors and things like that.
All right, so we had a lot of questions about these kinds of esports. Anthony Pizzo, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it. You work on your PhD over at Temple for sports, for esports.
Correct, yes.
And sports management.
Sports
and stuff like
management.
that. So what do you, when we talk esports, what does the E mean?
Sure, it means electronic sports, competitive video gaming.
Video games, basically.
How big is this phenomenon?
It's huge. There's scholarships for esports at American universities, tens of millions of dollars in prizes for these major events.
Okay, let's go back to 2 things you just said. Colleges are offering scholarships on how to play video games?
Yes, over 60 universities in the U.S. can get an athletic scholarship to go and play video games competitively.
Athletic scholarship, like a football player?
Correct, yes. Esport teams have...
Except you're using your fingers.
Exactly.
So people take this really seriously. So if you're playing it like in athletics, are people ranked? Like when we saw this thing down in Florida, was that like an invite only, or were they just people off the street? How does that work?
Sure, it was invite only. So there are elaborate ranking systems to determine who's the top ranked talent and bring them down on in to compete for a lot of prize money.
How much money are we talking?
For this tournament in particular, it's about $160,000 would have been the individual tournament prize, but over tens of millions of dollars for other tournaments.
So this David Katz guy apparently was a pretty good player, the shooter.
Yes, he was a good player for Madden, yes.
Because he had won the tournament, I think, the year before or something like that. But they're playing Madden. That's a football game, right?
Correct, yes.
You're not shooting people up.
Exactly, which is the surprising part of it, because usually esports have a lot of shooting type of games.
Yeah.
And those are the games you tend to associate with violence, but not this type of game.
Call of Duty, things like that,
Exactly.
Fortnite.
What kind of games are being played at these tournaments?
Mostly fantasy type games like Call of Duty, League of Legends, Fortnite, those type of games where you're competing against...
All right. Let's say in sports, you trash talk out on the field. Is there trash talking like in a venue where you're looking at the other guys playing?
Sure, that's a huge part of esports, and in particular sport-based esports like Madden, which could be one of the potential drivers for what happened down in Florida. You have these people playing video games by themselves 10 hours a day, but then all of a sudden they're up on stage, being watched by millions of people, and then all of a sudden they're being trash talked and losing. It can lead to some...
So they allow that trash talking right at that tournament?
It's part of the game, just like in football.
You're
and
insulting the other person.
Intentionally, yes.
Well, we have a team, I mean, our Sixers are getting behind this and many other teams. We have a team here in the Philadelphia area. So what's being done to deal with all that?
Great question. The 76ers own an esports team, Dignitas, and they've been very proactive. They put their players through boot camps to give them training on how to be proactive for people saying mean things about you on the internet, which can be done on the internet, as we know, and to really give them the skill to prepare them for stage fright, really.
I guess I'm not understanding. The 76ers, Comcast, other companies have esports teams?
Correct, yes.
What are they called? What are the 76ers called?
There's esports teams called Team Dignitas, and Comcast Spectacor owns the Philadelphia Fusion.
And so they're playing each other on the internet all day long?
Yeah, they're training and then competing live on the internet and TV, and millions of people are watching them play.
And so they'll show up at a venue with a 76ers shirt on or something?
They'll show up with a Team Dignitas and yes, the uniform on, and they'll highlight their relationship with the 76ers.
And the good point, I think, is also that these are, usually men, and they're young. So you're coming into this, and you probably are not prepared to be on that kind
intensity?
of that platform, that kind of stage with people watching and audiences, and as you would say, people commenting on what you're doing in.
Exactly. The esports industry has risen so quickly, so fast that the structure around it has not kept pace, and that's part of the security issues that we're seeing at these events now.
Well, people will say, and they've already said it, the fact that he's spending all these hours of the day looking at people shooting each other and blood flying everywhere with some of these, like Call of Duty, that leads to desensitizing your feelings about killing somebody.
Sure, and I think that's why we need some more institutional controls in there. People giving these people life skills to make the distinguishing factor between what's real and what's not, because you can play esports 10, 12 hours a day and get desensitized
and get blurred.
When you're not even living in the real world, as they say.
Exactly, yeah. So there are some companies like Nursery Gamers in Philly which are helping put people through boot camp to give them the skills to really not blur those lines so much.
Well, I learned a bunch of stuff today.
I did too. Great job. Thank you for
Thank you,
educating
Anthony.
us on so many things. We appreciate it.
Thank you for that, Mike and Karen. Some great information there from Anthony. A New Jersey runner is on a mission to help his community by sharing excess. He stopped by Good Day Philadelphia this morning to talk about his efforts, which are rather unique. Here's Mike and Karen.
You're about to meet a man who ran 240 miles over 3 days. Have you ever... Who's done that?
My legs hurt just hearing that.
I know it. I'm tired. He's also on a mission to help others in our community here. Here he is. It's even better with sound. Okay, we'll fix that and come back. But we'll talk to him a little bit, and then we'll play the whole package here. Good to see you, man.
Nice to meet you, Mike.
You and a man.
Ryan Lang, thank you for joining us. Good morning. So you're a college student.
I am.
And a huge runner.
Yes.
Okay, let's go back and start. Where were you born?
South Jersey, right over the bridge.
Medford?
Medford, New Jersey.
Medford,
yep.
proud. What high school?
Bishop Eustace Prep.
That is the home of one Steve Keeley, I believe. As a matter of
How
fact.
funny. So you used to play football, was your sport when
Right.
you were growing up.
Right.
And then how'd you get into running?
Wanted to lose some weight, and I enjoyed looking better and got
Yeah.
addicted to looking better and ultimately started doing longer races. I did my first marathon in 2016 and began to go, I went into a 50 miler, 100 miler, and last year I did the Moab 240 and just fell in love with the sport of endurance.
Well, you better be in love with it if you're running 240 miles over how many days?
About 3 days, yeah.
How do you do that?
What? That's 80 miles a day.
You're capable of a lot more than you think.
Do you eat when you're running? Are you
Yeah.
like shoveling down pizzas? Or like how do you do that?
So I will roll into an aid station, give Dad a big hug, order up a big stack of pancakes, throw them in a plastic bag, and keep on moving.
But you only started running 2 years ago.
Right.
And now you're running, a quarter of it's amazing. So what are you going to do this weekend?
So next weekend, I'm running the Tahoe 200, which is a 205-mile race that circumnavigates Lake Tahoe. But this year, I told myself if I was going to continue to do these races that have a lot of publicity, I want to do them for something greater than myself.
Okay.
So I met Evan Ellers, who is the founder of Sharing Excess.
Okay.
And Sharing Excess is a student-based nonprofit that helps students deliver their leftover food excess to community members in need. And they also partner with local grocery stores to take the leftover food to various areas around the city. And in a city where 1 in 5 people suffer from hunger and 1/3 of the food supply goes to waste, I thought it was a perfect opportunity because nutrition is such a big thing with these endurance races that I could, collaborate with Evan and really spread awareness for something that
Let me see if I figure out how this works. Are you taking leftover food from like Drexel's campus?
Not necessarily. So it doesn't have to be just Drexel, just university students in, it could be any university.
Right, no, I get all that.
And anything, so if you don't, we have meal swipes. And if you don't use your meal swipes, they just go to waste. So which was amazing, is why not just take these meal swipes and deliver them? He actually went out and delivered them to homeless people around the city one day.
He's a Drexel Dragon?
Yeah.
Nicely
Wow,
done.
that's really
so
cool.
how can people help you guys? They see you, you're doing all the running, the hard work for us, you're delivering the food. How can we help out?
Right.
Right, so on sharingexcess.com, there's a button where you could click Share Excess. And that is where you could buy different tiers of a t-shirt. So the t-shirts, one is maybe $20, one is $200, one is $1,000, and half of that, the proceeds go to creating meals for those in need, and the other half helps Sharing Excess as a startup.
Literally sharing your excess
I'll be
food.
darned.
It took me a minute, but I got there.
Yeah.
You're sharing the excess food from the cafeterias and from all the catering halls as well. Do you do that kind of things too, or like leftover?
Correct. Any leftover meal swipes, anything like that.
Good guy.
You're such an inspiration. All right, so how many miles are you running a week right now to get ready for this race?
So the past couple of months I've been doing around 80 to 90 miles. This weekend I just did my last race out in Killington, a 50K, to really blow out the legs one last time.
Sure, and now you're resting a little bit, getting ready?
It's taper time.
Tapering?
This is where it's hard because I have to not do anything. You know what I mean?
Well, you don't have time to do anything. You're not running 90 miles a week. Wow. Good to see you, man.
Hey,
What
thank
year are
you.
you at
That's really
Drexel?
cool.
I am a junior. I'm in my 4th out of 5 years.
What's the major?
real estate development and management.
Oh, you're going to be rich, too. That's great.
Good luck. We'll be following your race.
Isn't it funny, though?
Can we track you?
Yeah, you can. Actually,
what is it?
Online, Tahoe200.com, and you'll be able to track everyone throughout the whole weekend. It starts on September 7th, and the race ends officially September 11th.
You know, you're going to be at altitude.
Yeah.
Good luck with that. It's not exactly Moab.
No.
No, you'll do great.
Ryan, you're amazing.
Thanks again, Mike and Karen. We'll now give you a live look around the area where, once again, we're expecting temperatures in the 90s for the next 2 days before potential for rain and thunderstorms on Thursday. Thanks for watching.